Architectural workflows are continuously evolving. New technologies are affecting construction, while novel digital design methods are becoming part of the architect's everyday work. Our master's thesis is a contribution to this ongoing discussion and aims to demonstrate how the digitalization may affect the way in which we perceive and design architecture in future. We tested various digital design methods, trying to determine which of these are applicable to specific architectural tasks and which added value can be gained over conventional methods. We then used our insights to develop a computational design workflow that offers various additions to the architectural design process. These all have the same goal of supporting architects in their most central task, decision-making. We presented our work in the form of this interactive installation. As a case study for our research, we chose the discipline of stadium design since, due to its clear-cut geometric rules, it is suitable for exploring the advantages of design parametrization. This gave us the possibility to test our methods on two very different building parts, the so-called bowl and the hull. Bowl refers to the sports field and viewing stands, but also any other spaces and circulation areas underneath. The hull consists of a roof and a facade, which often form an entity. The large difference in construction and usage generally leads to a division in the design process in which each component undergoes an individual design cycle. This half of our installation deals with the bowl and this half with the hull. In an overlying circle, both these parts are continuously adjusted to one another. The challenge in stadium design is the large number of requirements that need to be met. On the one hand, there are regulations that can be evaluated numerically. On the other hand, there are very subjective criteria. Generally, the bowl is more the result of a numeric, functional optimization process, while the hull is more the conveyor of a creative or even symbolic gesture. It is becoming increasingly common for architects not only to use computational design methods, but even to code their own customized digital tools. To test the benefits in doing so, we developed a toolset for the generation of bowl geometries. Bowl Builder is an add-on for the algorithmic software Grasshopper, which in itself is a plugin for the CAD software Rhino. Rhino can be used to draw 2D and 3D geometry. Due to the large number of geometric interdependencies within a bowl, this method requires the model to be rebuilt more or less from scratch for most design decisions. Grasshopper, on the other hand, is an algorithmic modeler, meaning it allows the automation of commands. These so-called definitions require an initial investment of time. Thereafter, at least in practice, countless variations can be generated within a very short time. The problem is that often, especially in the case of topological modifications, large portions of the algorithm's logic need to be changed, which in turn can be complicated and time-consuming. A customized toolkit therefore aims to evade this problem and make it compatible for a whole number of different topologies. Of course, this requires a much larger development period. The following demo shows the steps in which a bowl is generally designed. One starts with the usage, in this case a soccer field, then a basic shape is chosen for the course of the stands. Here I have selected the so-called SOAP shape, which consists of arc segments. A requirement for the prefabricated construction is the utilization of straight building components, which is why the floor plan needs to be polygonized. In this step, a representative cross-section is drawn. To ensure adequate viewing conditions and circulation, an attempt is made to use the same cross-section throughout the stadium. As one can see, a modeling process that usually takes over an hour can be achieved in a matter of seconds using the tool. It is even possible to bring about considerable changes very quickly, for instance expanding the sports field by including a running track and replacing the SOAP shape with an oval, which in this case might be more efficient. Algorithmic models are useful not only for the generation of geometry, but also for its analysis. The essential factor for the section design is the adherence to a minimal so-called C value. This is the vertical distance from a spectator's eye to where it intersects the sightline of the spectator directly behind. The further the stands are from the sports field, the lower their inclination and vice versa. In stadium design, minor design changes can have a large global effect. For instance, if the height of the first row is modified only slightly, this has a huge impact on the building's overall height. And varying the minimum C value can indeed make a difference of several thousand tons of concrete. With this kind of economic and ecologic responsibility, such decisions should not be left to intuition. The toolkit aims to support the architect in making informed and conscious design decisions even at an early design stage. These insights are in fact not new discoveries. We therefore asked ourselves how we could conduct further research in order to tackle other everyday problems encountered by architects. For instance, architects often envision a certain spatial experience in a design. Despite their efforts to communicate this, the built result may well not have that spatial quality they had strived for. In the following study, we therefore attempted to make the future user experience of a building accessible in new ways during the design process. This is what the C-value distribution in a stadium may look like. The red areas fulfill the minimum C-value, while the blue areas indicate high values. Even for experienced architects, it can often be challenging to predict the implications of their design decisions. This animation shows the effect that a change in floor plan geometry can have on the C-values. It led us to doubt the reliability of the C-value as a metric for the viewing experience. Obviously, not all seats in a rectangular bowl are equally good. Wouldn't another criterion be, for instance, how far one needs to turn one's head in order to follow the match? Indeed, we were able to identify a whole range of criteria for the viewing experience. Now we needed to find out how to combine all this data to extract an overall evaluation metric. The problem is that these are subjective factors that can't possibly be made tangible appropriately by common means of visualization. We therefore turn to an alternative method of representation that we consider more effective in conveying spatial qualities: virtual reality. For the assessment of our data, we created scenes that could be modified manually while viewing them. This example gives a feeling of the importance of the C-value. And this scene shows the effect of the vertical angle at which the viewer observes the sports field. The study allowed us to assign subjective values to our numeric data. We were able to assess which criteria were vital, which numeric ranges were relevant, and realize that the evaluation isn't always proportional to the data values. Furthermore, we realized which proportions seem to constitute the user experience by means of the individual criteria. According to our assessment, the C-value, although no doubt important, played a much smaller role than is usually assumed. The evaluation resulting from this new criterion is much more differentiated than the mere C-value analysis. Since small design changes have a large impact, it is conceivable that a changed conception of such a building type could indeed affect the way in which it is designed in future and which forms it may take. Tracing subjective criteria back to numeric values gave us the possibility for evolutionary optimization. In this case, the optimization was even able to output different bowl topologies precisely because Bowl Builder is set up to be flexible in that way. All these variations achieve similar overall scores, but mediate differently between the defined optimization criteria. The rectangular bowl is material efficient but receives a low score according to our assessment criteria. The soap shape seems to mediate more equally between the different criteria. The shape that receives a particularly high user experience evaluation, however, is the oval. This is remarkable, seeing that this is a stadium shape that is generally dismissed for rectangular sports fields, presumably because it is less cost efficient. The diversity of stadium hull designs illustrates the creative freedom that exists in this discipline. To examine their typological similarities, we digitally remodeled a number of contemporary stadia and compared not only the resulting geometries, but also the definitions that define them. In this graph, the circuit-like figures represent grasshopper definitions. The 8 independent graphs on the left are each geared to generate a specific individual solution. We came to realize that all circuits use similar geometric components or building blocks, only differing in the specific usage of these components. On the right, we see an alternative approach. Here, a single definition is generated, which is designed to utilize the entire parametric spectrum of the geometric component. This method enables to create a far broader variety of solutions than the 8 figures we see on the left. We refer to this type of definition as a modifier. Here is an example. 3 parameters are defined to modify the geometry. The first parameter divides an input curve, for example the spatial boundary of the stadium, and creates vertical section curves. The second parameter rotates these sections along the initial boundary curve, and the third parameter then regulates the fillet radius. Depending on the constellation of the parameters, independent geometries are generated. At any given time, however, only one geometry is displayed in Grasshopper. An array of all the possible variations in Grasshopper is generally not possible, but we were interested in precisely such an array of solutions, and while searching for a suitable method for such a representation, we came across the research of paleontologist David Raup. He used the term morphological space to determine a virtual three-dimensional space in which each axis represents one of the geometric parameters that defines snail shells. This space contains all possible shapes that could be assumed by the shells, while the grey area represents the variations which have indeed been found in the animal kingdom. Inspired by this representation, we implemented the morphological space, which I will now refer to as parameter space, to our modifiers and created our own custom Grasshopper components in order to do so. The inputs to this modifier are three horizontal section curves. The output is a parameter space of variations. Any changes to the initial geometry affect the parameter space geometries in real time. Here, the value domains of the geometric commands are defined. In this step, the spatial resolution is determined for the three axes. All modified geometries are marked with a number in order for the designer to be able to choose individuals with which to proceed. For a better observation of the parameter space, the designer is able to unroll the space, that is, to rearrange the different floors side by side. It has become common for international tenders to require the roofing of the seating area, thereby vastly increasing the demands for economic and ecologic efficiency. The key criteria to investigate are environmental factors and structural behavior. We use the applications Ladybug and Caramba as a basis to customize our own evaluation tools. In this animation, the solar cycle is simulated in a graphic representation that demonstrates which seats are exposed to the sun at a particular time. The pie chart indicates the percentage of the sun-exposed audience. By combining the data from this animation, we can channel it into this concise time-lapse diagram. This gives an overview of the time period in which each seat is exposed. Full exposure throughout the defined period is shown in white, non-exposure in black. We incorporated the evaluation tools into our responsive modeling pipeline. The designer is presented with graphical feedback and numeric comparison values along the way in order to facilitate decision-making. Here, the height of the roof was varied, which subsequently produced different analytical results. In this next chart, instead of using sun vectors, we used records of wind conditions. We obtained a similar graphical representation, this time indicating the seats exposed to rain. An interesting feature of this tool is that it makes a suggestion of how the shape of the roof opening could be edited in order to guarantee shelter for all viewers, shown here in red. The application Caramba provides FEM analysis that can be used by architects to develop a better understanding of the structural behavior of their designed buildings. This example analyzes the force vectors and cross-section utilization of a virtual hull shape under dead load. To investigate aesthetic and spatial qualities of stadium hulls, we conducted another virtual reality study. In this example, we can modify the roof height. By adding a solar cycle, we can merge the numeric investigation with subjective feedback. The first-person perspective remains constant and a direct comparison of the geometric manipulation can be made. In this example, the width of the opening is investigated. To get a feel for the possible cantilever structure, the carrier depths change qualitatively. These studies allowed us to identify parameter domains for optimal subjective sensation. To simplify the modifier workflow, we limited their number of parameters to 3. The challenge was therefore to construct an n-dimensional parameter space with which it is possible to follow different design paths. This sketch illustrates our methodology. We start with the generation of a first morphology and select favored forms. These can then be analyzed and optimized using our evaluation tools. The optimized favorites are then connected to other modifiers that apply different geometric commands. The result is a stacking of responsive parameter spaces. We call this workflow interactive selection. This system is interactive in that changes in any of the morphologies propagate downstream and change any following parameter spaces. This is an example of an interactive selection process. It is an unrolled representation. A total of 10 parameter spaces with over 600 geometries were generated. The advantage of this representation is that it can be read as a map. The result is an overview of all generated geometries. The geometries developed in this case study could be understood as an archive of conceptual ideas to draw inspiration from. We started by extracting the boundary curve from a bowl produced by the Bowl Builder plugin and connected a modifier to generate a first parameter space. In the following slides, the pictograms on the bottom right illustrate which geometric commands are applied by the respective modifier. The unrolled map in the bottom left corner serves as an orientation. After sifting through the initial parameter space, we chose 5 shapes for further development. The first of the selected forms was connected to another modifier, which rotates the edge curves of the input, thereby creating new twisting designs. These shapes were arrived at through a 6-dimensional modification. Out of all these morphologies, we chose another favorite and connected it to 2 different modifiers, which in turn produced various triangulated surface composites. This is now a 9-dimensional modification. Let's look at the second selection from the first morphology. This form was connected to a modifier that segments the initial geometry. Here the number of created surfaces, their orientation and their length can be adjusted. Since we saw clear benefits in favoring closed stadium hulls, we decided to end this path here. This next line of inquiry generated hull shapes that closely follow the shape of the bowl. It started with a modifier that locks the middle curve and modifies only the top and bottom curves of the input. After selecting a preferred solution once again, we investigated various patterning logics for the hull as a source of inspiration. As mentioned earlier, the structure of the interactive selection is achieved by stacking parameter spaces in different parallel branches of inquiry. The structure of this design process is mirrored by the very appearance of the corresponding graph as it appears in the Grasshopper interface. Architects often have limited time to make important decisions. When such decisions lead to dead ends in the design process, it can often be difficult to backpedal in the decision chain and find another more suitable path. Our methodology is an attempt to counteract this by proposing a large flexibility in the design process. We developed a system that isolates and highlights the decisions of the architect in our interactive selection process. This design pedigree, as we call it, is the simplified representation of the interactive selection. Here, only the favorites are shown in a sorted order. The individual design pathways are more comprehensible. The paths that ran into dead ends become visible, as well as other strands which were favored. This illustrates the development of the individual design paths, exhibiting branching points at various design decisions, hereby setting checkpoints that can be reinstated at any time. Our design pedigree puts forth 3 finalists. The design variations were so far observed at a large-scale, bird's-eye level. Once again, virtual reality depiction allowed for a more subjective evaluation of the results. This first model shows the finalists from the first design path. Proportions and facade cladding can be evaluated from a personal or architectural perspective. This is the finalist from the third design path. And lastly, here's the triangulated geometry from the 5th design path. Bowls have a specified collection of parameters that need to be considered in their entirety due to their geometric interdependencies. We had to therefore find an alternative way of representing multidimensional parameter spaces. To do so, we used a machine learning algorithm called a self-organizing map, or SOM. Its functionality is based on the biological finding that many structures in the brain display a linear or planar topology, although the signals from the input space, such as visual stimuli, can be multidimensional. The brain obviously finds a way to reduce higher dimensions to 2-dimensionality. If there is a large multidimensional parameter space, out of which a certain area is to be visualized, an architect could do so by presenting the algorithm with a set of sample variations out of the space. The SOM finds out which space is thereby depicted and portrays this area in a planar, comprehensive arrangement. For instance, if we input colors, we are describing a 3-dimensional parameter space consisting of red, green, and blue. The SOM takes these inputs, sorts them, and generates the space that lies in between. In this next map, we added 3 dimensions, width, depth, and height. Applying this map to our bowl builder tool, we receive gradients of different bowl types. Since this map is planar, we have a 3rd dimension at our disposal that we can use to display certain qualities of the variations. In this example, the height describes how well the individual bolts adhere to our user experience criterion. The poorest results are achieved by the rectangular bowl, as was the case in the optimization process. However, they obviously do tend to improve their statistics with an undulation of the bowl perimeter. The oval stadia still yield better results. However, in their case it seems more efficient to do without the undulation. This type of visualization helps the designer to detect such correlations and therefore to choose between a large number of variations. Our thesis project was an attempt to portray the potentials of digital design processes. Nowadays, architects have access to novel digital design tools that could lead them to discover architecture in a new way. It is up to the individual designer if and to what extent he or she makes use of them. The digital cannot replace the architect. However, it may serve as an extension of our methods to enrich our thought processes and contribute to the development of architecture itself.